the Big Six menu now, finally also on the Sony FX6, as well as major firmware updates for the Venice 2, the Burano, the FR7, and even the 5-year-old A7S III, here at BSC Expo at the Sony booth.
You're watching CineD, supported by B&H and CVP.
Welcome here from BSC Expo 2026 here in London. Battersea Evolution, I think is the venue's name. Hi Daniel, how are you doing?
Hi Nino, I'm doing good.
So here at the Sony booth, you guys actually announced a little bit before the show, which we reported about, that there's a bunch of, actually I would say quite major firmware updates coming for Sony cameras, and it's the first time you're showing them. So let's go through them one by one. We have something new for the Venice 2 version 4.1. We have Burano version 3. We have FX6 version 6. FR7 version 4, and actually maybe you can mention that too, although it's not cinema line, but A7S III version 5. Yeah. But let's start with the Burano and the FX6, because I think those are the two updates that are probably most interesting to our audience.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're definitely the most anticipated. So if we go through the FX6, we introduced the similar to the Burano and the Venice, with how intuitive it is to start learning a camera that you maybe never worked with before. We call it the Big Six, where you have a very simple overview of what the camera's settings are and introducing a way to quickly change them. So we're talking the ISOs, the shutter speeds, the frame rates, being able to see what the camera is set to and how to very quickly and effectively change that. So it's been very successful with the Burano and the Venice. So now we're introducing that for the FX6. I think a lot of people also have been waiting for the Blackmagic RAW, which will also be available on the FX6 and the new firmware.
So when is that firmware for the FX6 coming?
Well, that will come in March. That's the current plan.
Okay, let's move on to the Burano version 3. One feature that's coming now that is something that a lot of people requested from when the camera was announced, right?
Are you talking about the
anamorphic?
The anamorphic one, yeah. So we introduced actually anamorphic in version 2, where we had the 4x3, but now we also have the 6x5, which a lot of people have been asking for. So anybody who loves anamorphic, especially 2 times, will be very happy that they have now 2 different flavors. This works with XO-CN, so our RAW encoding workflow on the Burano. But we also have some more capabilities with the high-speed 4K 120 frames per second in 16:9. So before it was only 17:9, now so 16:9, and lots of.
And in Super 35, right?
Those are in Super 35. We already introduced them in full frame, so now we have them in full frame and in Super 35.
In full frame, how fast can it shoot? Like, it's also 120 or 60?
So that depends on what you ask the camera to do. So people have been asking to increase the speed of how fast the sensor is behaving, and we've made a firmware update so you can use the camera in full frame but have a faster readout time, meaning that you can now go above 60 and up to 120 frames per second in 4K, even though you're in full frame.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know that was already announced, because that's literally the 2 points that I think a lot of people criticized when the camera was released. So it's nice to hear that they are resolved now.
Well, you also want to mention the infrared spectrum that we also fixed. So anybody who buys a Burano today will have a different infrared spectrum. Anybody who has a Burano already has had the option and opportunity to go and contact Sony, and we'll replace that optical low pass filter. So it has the infrared spectrum cut out, so you can have tungsten lights, or you can use them in heavy daylight where you would have a lot of infrared, and the camera won't capture that anymore.
Very cool. So let's move on to the Venice 2.
Oh yeah. The Venice 2 got a firmware update which first of all introduced the EL zone, which means that this new design by Ed Lackman, where you would focus on your middle gray, and then you would have some intuitive colors where you can go in and say, well, let's say you're facing exposure on the face, then you would have some colors on one side and some other colors on the other side. Very quickly, very intuitive way of exposing your picture. It's a good tool. The other one is actually the Mini. So we started in February 2026, this month, here at BSC. We started shipping the Mini. So if you already have a Venice 2, giving it the firmware update will mean that you can attach the Mini and start using the same 8K sensor, but now in a 550 gram small camera head. So it's very unique to be put into small spaces, or you can have a very lightweight handheld kit.
Is the Mini actually, I forgot, maybe I asked that in the original interview with Sebastian already a year ago, but I forgot if it's actually replacing the original Rialto system.
No, we still have the Rialto 2. So with the Rialto 2 takes the original sensor that we have, either the 6K or the 8K, and supports both of them. The unique thing I would say about the Rialto 2 is you can keep the ND filters inside, and you can remote control and change 8 stops of ND really quickly. With the Mini, we had to compromise this. So we have inside the actual filter trace that you would have to replace. That takes a little bit longer than just pushing a button and going one step at a time up to 2.4. So there's a difference, there's a compromise, but there is also some benefits of having something that's very small and lightweight. So both will work, both can go up to 12 meters, and both will give you the same image as they have the same sensor.
To round off the cinema camera firmware updates, what's new with the PTZ version of the, can I say the PTZ version of the FX6, which is the FR7?
That would be very fair. Yeah, it's the same sensor, same technology in the PTZ. Very popular for a lot of producers have found out this is really interesting. They can keep the look. So the FR7 is getting some AI updates, so we can start not only track humans and put focus on humans, but we could also track them so the robotics will move and follow. Even if you turn away from the camera and you won't see a face, it will actually scan the exoskeleton and follow the person that you've targeted, which is really smart. We also started introducing some sports applications as well with some of the other PTZs, so you can start using these and follow the ball instead of just following the single player. We got a new system introduced to the FR7 for any virtual production enthusiasts. It's called OpenTrack.io, which is also really interesting.
That's open source, right?
It is open source, yeah. So it's another thing that's available for the PD sets, giving them just more capabilities and more possibilities. And also for virtual production, we've introduced our own tracking system, and we started delivering that this month. So some of the first clients have been very happy receiving the first units, and this just means that you can track on location, indoors, outdoors, without using markers, stickers, QR codes. All of this just works by scanning static points in the building or outside, and give you a very resilient, very reliable, fast setup of getting tracking information, either for live AR. We can show this at the booth, but we can also do what we call FBX recording. So anything that a visual effects post house would be very happy to receive.
And actually, before we talk a little bit about the A7S III, which surprisingly is still getting a lot of love with firmware update, 5 years, 6 years after its release? It's been a while.
Yeah.
Tell me quickly about the Ocellus.
The Ocellus. So the Ocellus is a tracking or markerless system. So the markerless system means that we don't use stickers. We don't need to go in a location and ask somebody to go on the ceiling and start putting stickers up. We can turn it wherever it makes sense that it will get the most field of view. Instead of having one sensor, it has 5. So you could have 1 or 2 or 3 sensors by being covered by, let's say, a flag. Maybe there's a camera operator, or somebody decides, I'm going to put this monitor on top of the camera and limit the field of view. We still got a load of coverage around the 5 sensors, so you can very elegantly and effectively continue to track even though you're getting obscured. Something that we've seen making this product very resilient in many different environments. And it can use either the visual spectrum that human eyes can see, because it's got an image-based sensor, but it also has the infrared spectrum, so I can use the infrared light. So let's say there's no light, there's low light, or there's lots of pollution with moving lights, I can still see what's going on in the infrared spectrum and track, even though the human eye would have a difficulty to see what's going on.
Okay, and finally, tell me about the update to the A7S III version 5.
Well, with this camera being some years in the market, a lot of owners will be happy to see this firmware update. It's of course free of charge, and it will give you a lot of tracking information or tracking updates where you can have Spot XL, you can go in and change lots of different ways that the camera should behave with the autofocus that's built in. So it more or less bumps it up to have some of the technology that people who have the newer cameras would be familiar with, and anybody who has a 5-year-old camera will appreciate that suddenly it's still very competitive. Another thing that's quite a big topic at the moment, especially with AI and being able to generate images by just prompting, we have the authenticity certification. So when you take a still, you can have a certificate on the actual still image, and you can prove to anybody that this is a real picture, this is the raw picture. Nobody has played with this material, nobody has actually prompted this. So it's not fake news, it's actually something you created yourself and you can prove it.
And now also for video, right?
Well, not for the A7S, but we've introduced now with video cameras. So A7S and many of the still cameras will support this for stills. And we have some news cameras now that also support this for video. So any video journalists who are looking to produce a documentary and being able to prove that this is fully authentic, then you can use the Z300 for that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm also a user of the A7S III. I like that it's still getting updates. So I still hope there will be an A7S IV at some point, but let's see.
There's always new cameras from Sony coming, yes.
But very last question. There has been a little bit of criticism of Sony when it comes to firmware updates over the last 1 or 2 years, because there were some botched firmware updates that were pulled. I've seen only good feedback so far from this update. But is there anything you want to say to that? Because it's like, we just see in the comment section that people are getting nervous when Sony is releasing a firmware update because they were like a little bit burned in the past. Is there something in the background that Sony is maybe doing a little bit more quality control before this stuff is released?
Yeah, I can only apologize on behalf of the company that things are not going as within people's expectations. But we do take our camera technology and development very seriously. One of my roles is to collect European data. Customers who own a camera or want to maybe use one of our cameras on a project receive the information. Why is this not a camera that is fitting them personally for this project? How can we improve it? How, instead of just making a new camera, can we go in and use software resource hours of engineers to actually go in and make this camera that we already launched, make it better? And how can we make as many people happy as possible? So it's my responsibility with my team to report to Japan, have regular meetings, and try to prioritize the best firmware updates to be introduced to cameras that are already in the market, instead of just making new cameras every time somebody wants something new. So it's quite a difficult balance. And as you say, we want to make a firmware without any bugs. It's not fun to do a firmware update and then find out, well, I used to be able to do this part of, having this function work properly, flawlessly, and then suddenly after the firmware update, it didn't work anymore. So we're spending more time to do a QC. Normally that would maybe take a few weeks. We're getting closer to maybe a month now to doing QC, so it takes just more time and more hours from our side. And bear in mind, our firmware updates, they're free of charge. So you already bought the camera and you're just getting more functionalities, and we really enjoy being able to support and help our customers, but we also want to make the best cameras and the best tools that you could choose. So it's a very difficult balance, and we hope we can do better.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. And thanks everybody for watching. If BSC is still running when you see this, come over, check out the Sony booth. All the firmware updates I think are on display here. Also stay tuned to CineD for a lot more videos from BSC, and see you on the next one.